They called it the perfect match from the very start. Two people whose lives seemed destined to intertwine. I believed it too. From the moment I met Daniel at a friend's engagement party, everything felt like a movie. He was warm, attentive, and charming in a way that seemed effortless. He laughed at my jokes, remembered the smallest details I mentioned, and somehow made me feel like the only person in the room. We exchanged numbers, started texting late into the night, and soon it became a constant rhythm. Good mornings, check-ins between meetings, late-night calls. He wasn't just someone I was dating. He was my best friend, my partner, my safe place. At least, that's what I thought. Asterisk, in the first year, he seemed perfect. Always ready with surprises, always. Finding ways to make me feel special. My friends would say, "You're so lucky, Aisha. Men like him don't come around often." And I believed them. We took weekend trips, spent holidays with each other's families, talked about building a future together. He even picked out a little apartment for us to move into after the wedding. Or at least, that's what he told me. But somewhere along the way, small things started to shift. Asterisk, it was never enough to be obvious. Just little details I brushed aside. His phone was always face down on the table. If I reached for it to check the time, he'd casually slide it away. He started answering calls in another room, saying it was just work stuff. At first, I laughed it off. He had a demanding job, and I didn't want to be the controlling, suspicious fiancé. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the unease creeping in. It was like a shadow in the corner of a bright room. Easy to pretend it's not there, but impossible to truly ignore. Asterisk, when the proposal came, I was still holding on to the man I thought he was. He took me to the place where we first met, got down on one knee, and said all the right words. I said yes, without hesitation. In that moment, I felt certain about us. My family was thrilled. His family welcomed me warmly, and for months it was nothing but wedding planning and dreams of the life ahead. But that shadow never really went away. Asterisk, as the wedding day drew closer, those small red flags became harder to dismiss. He seemed distracted more often, his eyes clouding over when we talked about the honeymoon. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd pull me close, kiss my forehead, and say, "Just tired, love." It's been a lot of work lately. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that stress was normal, that maybe I was overthinking. Asterisk, the night before the wedding, I overheard something that gnawed at me. Daniel was outside on the porch, talking to his best friend. Their voices were low, but I caught a few words that froze me in place. His friend said, "Does she know?" Daniel paused before answering, "Not now. It's better this way." I remember feeling my chest tighten, my ears buzzing, but when I stepped closer, they changed the subject and laughed it off. Later, when I asked about it, Daniel just said they were talking about a surprise for me. I told myself not to read too much into it. After all, the wedding was hours away. Who ruins their own happiness by digging for problems that might not even exist? Asterisk, the morning of the wedding came with a rush of excitement and nerves. My family was buzzing around me, making sure everything was perfect. The dress fit like it was made for me. The flowers filled the room with the scent of roses, and every face I saw was smiling. I kept smiling too, but inside there was a heaviness I couldn't explain. My hands shook as I held the bouquet. The makeup artist told me it was normal. Brides always feel anxious. Maybe she was right. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Asterisk, I stood in front of the mirror, trying to see the version of myself I had imagined for this day. Radiant, happy, secure in her choice. But the reflection, looking back at me, didn't match that vision. My smile felt forced. My eyes carried questions I couldn't answer. Somewhere beneath the lace and the pearls, there was a voice whispering that I was about to make a mistake. I told myself to stop, to push the thought away, to focus on the life waiting for me just beyond those vows. Breath and straightened my veil. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew about Daniel and about us was about to change forever. Asterisk. The morning carried a strange stillness, even with the noise of people moving in and out of the room. My phone buzzed on the table, and without thinking, I picked it up. It was a message from an unknown number. The words were short, urgent. "You deserve to know the truth before you walk down the aisle." My stomach dropped. I opened it, half expecting some harmless prank, but what I saw made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. Screenshots of messages, dozens of them, stretched out in the thread. Asterisk, they weren't from me. They weren't from any woman. The messages were between Daniel and someone saved in his phone as Sam. The language wasn't casual. These weren't friendly check-ins. They were intimate, personal, filled with words you only say to the person who has your heart. I kept scrolling, my hands cold and unsteady. I can't wait until it's just us. I hate pretending. I wish you were here instead of her. Each line made my throat close tighter. Asterisk, at first I thought Sam was another woman I had never met. But as I read more, the truth formed clearly, and it was nothing I had ever imagined. Sam wasn't a woman. Sam was his closest friend from college, the one he'd introduced me to briefly at a dinner months ago. I remembered their easy banter, how Daniel's eyes softened around him in a way I thought was just deep friendship. But these messages weren't about friendship. They were love letters hidden in plain sight. And I had been blind to them all this time. Asterisk. There were confessions of late-night calls, of shared dreams about living together, of fear about how their families would react. And there it was, the truth he had never spoken aloud. He felt trapped in the engagement, cornered by expectations, afraid of the fallout if he admitted who he truly loved. Every word I read pulled me further from the life I thought I was about to start. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and relentless, drowning out the sounds of people preparing around me. Asterisk. I wanted to storm into the next room and demand answers. I wanted to throw the phone at him and shout until I had no voice left. But I couldn't move. The betrayal wasn't simple. It wasn't the kind you could package neatly into anger alone. It was confusion, disbelief, grief, and a hollow ache all at once. I didn't just lose a partner in that moment. I lost the future I thought we shared, the safety I believed in, the version of him I had built in my mind. Asterisk. I sat there, phone clutched in my hand, and replayed every little moment I'd ignored, the sudden silences in our conversations, the way he'd disappear to take certain calls, his distant gaze when we talked about our honeymoon. They all fit together now like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Asterisk. I forced myself to stand, the weight of my dress suddenly unbearable. I needed to see him, not to hear lies or excuses, but to look into his eyes and know, without question, that everything was real, or that none of it was. I stepped out into the hallway, following the faint sound of his voice. My breath caught as I heard him just around the corner, speaking softly into the phone. His tone was tender, almost trembling. And then I heard the words I would never forget. I wish you were here instead of her. Asterisk. There was no shock left to feel, only a cold certainty that nothing could undo what I had just learned. He wasn't mine, not in the way a partner should be. His heart belonged elsewhere, and I was nothing more than a role he felt pressured to play. I didn't step forward. I didn't confront him there. I stood in the shadow of the hallway, letting the truth sink deep into my bones until it left no room for denial. Asterisk. I turned back before he could see me, retreating into the bridal suite, my pulse hammering against my temples. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, eyes wide, lips pressed together in something between fear and resolve. The noise outside seemed far away, like the whole world had slipped out of focus. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. With absolute clarity, I could not marry a man whose love belonged to someone else. Not today. Not ever. The air felt heavier the moment I stepped back into the room, like the walls themselves knew the truth and were closing in on me. My heart wouldn't slow down. I couldn't sit still. Every breath reminded me of what I had just heard, and with each second, the idea of standing at that altar felt less like a possibility and more like a trap. The voices outside the door grew louder, signaling that time was running out. People were expecting me to smile, walk, and vow myself to a man whose vows would mean nothing. Asterisk, I reached for the bouquet lying on the table, but my hands froze. The flowers suddenly looked like props in a performance I no longer wanted to be. Part of my chest tightened until the only clear thought I had was that I needed to leave. Not later, not after a conversation, but now, before I let my life be bound to someone who had already given himself to another. Asterisk, my phone lay where I had dropped it earlier. I grabbed it, tucking it into the small purse I had brought for after the ceremony. My heels felt like weights on my feet, slowing me down. I slipped them off, holding them in one hand, and moved toward the door. I could hear the soft hum of music starting downstairs, guests settling into their seats, the officiant preparing. The world outside that room was ready for a celebration. I was ready to vanish, asterisk, when I stepped into the hallway. The sounds of laughter and conversation surrounded me, but it all blurred together. My focus was on the exit, nothing else. I moved quickly, eyes down, avoiding anyone who might try to stop me. I was almost to the back staircase when I heard my mother's voice behind me. She was calling my name, confusion and worry mixing in her tone. I didn't turn around at first, but her footsteps closed in. Asterisk, she caught up to me, asking where I was going, reminding me that guests were waiting. Her eyes searched my face for an answer, but I couldn't give her the truth. Not here, not in the middle of the building that held my almost weeding. My voice was steady, even though everything inside me was shaking. I told her, I can't do this. Her expression shifted from shock to panic. She tried to reason with me, saying it was just nerves, that I could talk to Daniel, that I'd regret walking away. I didn't argue. I just repeated the same words. I can't. And then I kept moving. Asterisk, by the time I reached the lobby, my pulse was racing. The glass doors loomed ahead, the outside world just beyond them. I pushed them open and stepped into the cool air. It hit me like a jolt, waking me fully from the fog that had been clouding my mind. The sound of the rain starting to fall on the pavement was the only thing grounding me in that moment. I pulled my purse strap tighter on my shoulder, looked up the street, and spotted a taxi idling a few yards away. Asterisk, I ran toward it, barefoot now, my dress brushing against wet asphalt. The driver looked surprised when I opened the door and slid in, my dress spilling across the seat. I gave him the address without hesitation, the one place I knew I could go without explaining myself immediately. My voice cracked slightly as I said it, but he didn't ask questions. He just nodded and pulled away from the curb. Asterisk, the venue began to fade behind us, the bright flowers and white tents shrinking until they were just a blur in the side mirror. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, my breath fogging the window. My hands were clenched in my lap, and I didn't realize how tightly I was holding my purse until my fingers began to ache. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, once, maybe twice, but said nothing. I was grateful for the silence. Asterisk somewhere between the city blocks and the rain-streaked glass. The weight in my chest shifted. The ache was still there, the betrayal still raw. But there was a strange lightness growing alongside it, the faint beginning of freedom. I had no idea what conversations or consequences would come next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to stand under those lights, smiling for cameras, pretending that love could survive where truth never existed. I had chosen to walk away, and for the first time that day, that choice felt like mine. Maya opened the door before I could even knock, twice, pulling me inside without a word. She didn't ask why I was in a wedding dress in the middle of the day, soaked from the rain. She just wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and guided me to the couch. For a few minutes, I couldn't speak. My throat felt raw, my thoughts scattered. But when the words finally came, they tumbled out in uneven fragments. I told her everything: the messages, the phone call, the truth I hadn't seen until it was staring me in the face. Her expression shifted between shock and sadness, but not once did she interrupt me. When I finished, she took a long breath and said quietly, "His truth doesn't make you less. It just means he was never yours to begin with." Asterisk, the next hours blurred together. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating on the table. I ignored it until the buzzing became impossible to tune out. Daniel had called 10 times, sent a dozen messages. Most were short. "Where are you? Please talk to me. I'm sorry." But one was long. A wall of text that I read only once. He admitted it all, that Sam had been in his life for years. that they had fallen in love long before I came along, that he had been too afraid to tell his family the truth. He said he cared about me and didn't want to hurt me, but he also couldn't walk away from the life everyone expected him to live. I stared at his words for a long time, feeling the final thread snap. Asterisk, I typed my reply slowly, each word deliberate. I hope you find the courage to live honestly, but I deserve someone whose truth includes me. I pressed send and placed the phone face down on the table, knowing there was nothing more to say. Asterisk, the following days were quiet but heavy. My family was angry, confused, some of them disappointed. I heard the whispers about how I'd humiliated myself by running out, but their opinions didn't change what I knew to be true, that walking away had been the only choice that wouldn't have destroyed me. I stayed with Maya for a while, avoiding familiar places, avoiding questions I wasn't ready to answer. Slowly, the noise began to fade, replaced by a strange stillness that felt like space to breathe. Asterisk, weeks passed, and I began to build a rhythm that belonged only to me. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try, but never made time for. I started going for early morning walks, the kind where the streets are quiet and the air feels clean. I booked a weekend trip alone to a place I'd never been, not to run from something this time, but to see what it felt like to choose a destination without considering anyone else. Each small decision stitched together a version of myself that didn't need someone else's promises to feel complete. Asterisk, every so often, Daniel's name would appear in my messages, though I rarely opened them. I didn't hate him. Hatred would have meant I still wanted something from him. What I felt was emptier than that. The quiet acceptance that our story had ended long before the wedding day. I just hadn't noticed. Asterisk, one afternoon, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop with a book, lost in the quiet. A man at the next table asked if the seat across from me was taken. We spoke for a few minutes about the weather, about the book I was reading, about nothing important. When he smiled, it was warm, genuine. But I didn't rush to imagine anything beyond that moment. I left with a small smile of my own, not because I saw a future there, but because it felt good to know I could connect without needing it to be more. Asterisk, the day I went back to my apartment for the first time. The dress was still hanging in the garment bag where I'd left it. I didn't cry. I didn't even open it. I just carried it to the back of the closet and shut the door. That chapter didn't need to be destroyed. It just needed to stay closed. Asterisk, one evening, I drove to the beach just before sunset. The waves rolled in and out, the horizon glowing in shades of gold and deep orange. I walked barefoot along the shoreline, letting the water wash over my feet, the cold grounding me in the present. As the sun sank lower, I realized I didn't feel like I'd lost a life. I felt like I'd been given the chance to start one. Asterisk, I didn't marry the wrong man. I didn't marry at all because when the choice was between his truth and my own, I chose mine. And that was the first step toward a future that actually belonged to me. Asterisk,